we have Liz Fenwick, who's an American, whose heart, she says, is forever in Cornwall. Hence her books, The Cornish House, A Cornish Affair, A Cornish Stranger, Under a Cornish Sky, and a novella, A Cornish Christmas Carol. And the latest, The Returning Tide, which, despite not having Cornish in the title, promises to sweep you away to the beautiful Cornish coast. That must have been a killer for you. How can I get it in there? And then we have Maeve Harron, who is an Oxford Law graduate who worked in journalism and television before getting a proper job. Before writing, I say that, safe from having escaped from television, before writing her first novel, Having It All, which was a worldwide bestseller, translated into 26 languages and turned into a mini-series in Korea. I'm dying to hear about it. Why is that just so funny to us?
It's so funny. I didn't recognise who the characters were, except one of them kept on drinking from a whiskey bottle. So I went, okay, I know who that is. But otherwise,
it's perfect. South Korea, yes, yeah.
South Korea.
She wrote, otherwise she wouldn't be sitting here now. She wrote 8 more contemporary novels, 1 work of non-fiction, The Froth on the Cappuccino, extolling life's small pleasures, and 3 years ago began to write historical fiction. Her latest book is not historical, it's An Italian Holiday. So it's lovely to have you both here today. I think it's... actually, do you know the area at all, ladies?
I know Somerset a little bit, but I realise I'm in Devon, so I'm being very careful I don't offend everybody. So I just think it's very beautiful. That's safe, isn't it?
Okay, that's safe. You've dug yourself out of there. What about you then, Liz?
I know Sidmouth because my older son went to prep school at St John's there.
Right, but not Tiverton. Okay, and people always say, because I was brought up in Cornwall, when you come into Devon, you find all the old boys will say, "Did you do it in a day, did you? You went over the bridge and come back in a day, did you, my queen?"
My queen.
My queen.
Yes.
Anyway, I always think it's a good idea to hear about the books, first of all, that we're talking about. I just want to say, both books made me homesick. I can be forgiven for thinking the Cornish one made me homesick because I was brought up there. I'm not at all Italian, but the book made me feel that I was, full of pasta and very Italian, because you both, the way you write about the countryside is so evocative. So, shall we start with you, Liz? Returning Tide. Tell us a little bit about the story, and so that I don't give the end away.
Well, The Returning Tide it began with my editor saying to me, I want a big book. And we did a bit of brainstorming, and the one thing that came across to me was my mother-in-law, who was a Wren telegraphist in World War II. And one night, I think it was in '94, something had been mentioned about the Slapton Sands incident. And we were in Cornwall and having dinner, and she suddenly said, I was working that night. I was working with the Americans. I heard them die. They stopped using code and went to plain language. And even as I'm telling you that now, I still get chills up and down my spine. She said it was absolutely awful. And later on, I pressed her for more information. She said, oh, yes, I'll write it down. And of course, she never did. And of course, what I hadn't realized at that point is she was still under the Official Secrets Act. So she couldn't say any more about it. And that is what I built my story around.
Yeah, I'm sure maybe a lot of you people know the story of Operation Tiger, where the American troops were 3,000 evacuated from Slapton, and the American troops came into practice for the D-Day landings in Utah Beach, because the beach was similar to Utah. Yeah. And over 700 American servicemen died that night, yes, because 9 German U-boats came in from Lyme Bay, and they were killed in friendly fire as well.
Yes, they were.
Friendly fire first, and then these U-boats came in. So all these wonderful. And I think if you have read any of Michael Morpurg as well, Mr. Tibbs, he writes about it. It is an incredible story. And I just want, jumping in here, but you obviously know the story of Ken Small. Ken Small was a Plymouth who bought the tank up.
Yes.
Because he was so upset that nobody had had anything there to remember all these wonderful American troops who came down. So no wonder that ignited your fire. So where did you...
It did, and I suddenly thought, well, what's it like to hold that inside you? And does that change you? And of course it does change you, and how does it alter you and everything about you? So that was kind of the genesis, the seed that pulled everything else along. And I'm an only child, so I've always been fascinated by the dynamics of siblings, and particularly sisters, and how there is such a passionate love, but there's also the other side, that competition and that jealousy and hate that can take place. So I put it all together, and that's how the Returning Tide was born.
Well, let's have a little bit more, because I mean, it's Amelia and Adele, and you use time zones. So you take us. Yeah.
It's told in 2 time periods. So the present day, I think when I was writing it, it was 2015, and we start out with Elle, as she is then, preparing for her granddaughter's wedding. And it's all very emotional for her, because the date that she's chosen was the date her sister got married. And so we have that, and on the other side of the Atlantic we have Lara, who is with her great-grandfather, who's in his last moments, and his last word is Adele, and this is a name she's never heard. And he had never remarried, and so she is at a crossroads in her life, having been a chef and basically lost it, and got herself fired and was on gardening leave. So her brother kind of suggests she goes off to find out about her great-grandmother and her family history and catch up with an old friend. And eventually they all collide.
But it's that wonderful moment when she hears her grandpa say Adele, and she thinks, well, that's not Grandma's name.
No.
And I've gone a bit cold now thinking that, but there is that moment when I read it, ooh, what's going on here then? And so she decides to come down to Cornwall and find out all about it. And can we hear a bit?
Yep. I'm one of these people that always reads from the very beginning.
Good place to start.
It is. So this is the very beginning of the book. So it's Winwood, Monan Smith, Falmouth, Cornwall, 12th of September 1945. The marquee housing the wedding party was small, but it was not needed. Under the clear blue sky, the wheat in the next field rippled in the light easterly breeze, but the sea swelled like my sister's belly. The war was over. She had just married, and not too soon, for she was starting to show. Her groom, handsome in his U.S. Army captain's uniform, stood awkwardly beside her with his arm resting against her back. He squinted into the distance, looking for something that had been lost. Innocence, I should imagine. Eventually they would head to America, and, if fate were kind, I would never see my sister again. Touching the pearls at my neck, I turned away from the couple, and my father came to me with his camera. His hand shook. "Take the photograph for me." I crossed my arms. "Take it," he barked, as if he was giving the orders to his troops. His uniform demonstrated that he outranked me. He was a major in the army, while I had just been demobbed from the Navy. He had a role, and I was adrift on the tide, ready to go where it would take me, as long as it was away from here. Holding the camera in the direction of the couple, I would not look through the viewfinder. I did not want to see them perfectly framed in the September sunshine. Instead, I peered over the top of the camera at the house. Up until recently, Winwood had been a place of happiness, a refuge despite the war. I pressed the shutter button. The camera clicked. I handed it back to Father and walked away. My duty was done. I'd had enough. In front of me, the waters of Falmouth Bay glistened. Below, the tide was out, revealing the rocks that threatened any boat without a chart trying to navigate onto the shore at high water. My sister had always been the romantic one. She never stopped talking about love. Love. How deluded I'd been. One night in London at the Savoy, I had met the most handsome U.S. lieutenant. Just one glance from his big blue eyes, and I was lost without a map, and my compass found a different north. Everything changed.
Thank you. Yes, we have a little ripple. Why not? Now we can see from that you use real places.
Oh yeah,
Mornan Smith, Mownan,
yes.
And Falmouth, and there are many places in there. You, on the other hand, Maeve, in An Italian Holiday, have created a sort of a fictional place, Lanzarella.
Yeah.
So tell us about An Italian Holiday.
Yes, indeed. I always loved a book called The Enchanted April. I don't know whether any of you know it, by Elizabeth von Arnim. It's always rather dangerous to take a book you love, but I wanted to create a kind of modern version of that. That's a story of 4 Edwardian women who have very sort of trapped lives in various ways, and they answer an advert and end up going to this wonderful house in Portofino in Italy, and in the sort of sunshine of Italy and the unfamiliarity of the country and everything they encounter, they start to change. And I'd done the same idea with An Italian Holiday. There are 4 women who've got very modern dilemmas. One of them finds her husband in bed with a younger woman. Another one is losing her company in a rather embarrassing public way. Another one has a very overbearing mother, and then another one is has a rather not unpleasant but a sort of fairly controlling husband. He's not horrible, but he's just likes to know where she is all the time. Anyway, and they go to Italy. They go to this house which is very above Amalfi, on the Amalfi coast. And the devices I use to get them there are quite clever, because obviously, I've got to find ways that are convincing to get them all there together. 4 women who don't know each other and don't like each other necessarily at the beginning. In fact, one of them, the bossy Angela, says that she doesn't like women friends because all women friends do is unburden their problems to each other and then go back to a bad situation. And that's why she doesn't have women friends. But of course, Angela's going to change, isn't she? Because of course, novels are always about change and doing it in a convincing way. And there's something about this place which is really Ravello and Amalfi. And I changed the names because people always complain if you move the cathedral. I can't think why.
I see.
So I can do more with it if it hasn't got the actual name. But they are enchanted places, wonderful places. And I took my characters there, and then, they've got the lemons growing in the lemon groves.
No, it's not called a lemon grove, is it?
It's a lemon garden. They're very fussy, because I went there last year with my friend who speaks fluent Italian, and we spent a week going around lemon groves, because lemon groves are part of the story.
Yes, absolutely research, tax deductible.
Absolutely research, yeah. And they call them lemon gardens. In fact, they call them lemon paradises, which is absolutely wonderful. The lemon groves, or gardens, were planted by the Arabs 1,000 years ago, and they are amazing. They are unfortunately going to rack and ruin, which is part of the story, because one of my characters is going to save a lemon grove, try and save a lemon grove. So they go there, and then, things come unstuck for them. They become the other way. They unstick and begin to change and begin to discover friendship and love and a bit of sex, not too much, but.
I was going to say it's sort of the complete opposite of Big Brother, where everybody just falls to pieces and falls out. Yeah. They sort of all get together.
They do.
Yeah,
they do.
And it's quite interesting that both of you have houses that are almost like characters in the book, which are very, very important. I mean, this house is a real character. And your house, I've seen a million of those great big granite Cornish houses that just are so, they've got history in their stone, it just holds it like a story, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that you both use that. Sorry,
I suppose a house is a metaphor as well, isn't it? You're enclosed. It's a place where you're in the same place together, and where dramas are best taking place when you're in a place together, and a house is such a place. And we've obviously both created houses we probably love to live in ourselves.
Yes. I think so. Do you want to read a little bit?
Yes, I'll read a little bit. Now, this is a character. As I say, when they get there, they start to change from their rather glued up lives. And this is a character called Claire, who's a caterer in London. And she's the one with the rather controlling husband. She's just arrived. They've been there about a week, and it has been pouring with rain in London. It's the wrong weather to read this to you, actually, because it should be pouring with rain outside. It's been pouring with rain when they left, and then they come and they arrive, and it's still pouring with rain. And then the next day, it is just beautiful. And she's an early morning person, Claire, so she gets up and she goes for a wander, and there's nobody about. and this is Claire when there's nobody about. She thinks. So, on the next level down, a small fountain trickled beside a half-hidden grotto with a freshwater pool built into the rock face. Claire almost clapped her hands in delight. On the edge of the pool, a life-size marble nymph kneeled, staring into the water, an expression of longing on her face. The quality of the carving was extraordinary. This is not the work of some local stonemason. It had to have been chiselled by the hand of a master. An irresistible temptation overcame Claire. She glanced furtively around, then, satisfied she was alone, stripped off her clothes down to her pants and bra. Oh, what the hell, she thought. The nymph's naked, why not me too? The water was icy cold and clear as gin, but country-bred Claire just held her breath until she got used to it. She found a small ledge where she could support herself and stared again at the statue. Is it your lost lover you're searching for? She inquired of the stone maiden, banished under the water by some jealous goddess. The only answer was a laugh. Claire swung round to find Giovanni's the sexy gardener, pushing a wheelbarrow, his shirt undone even further than Simon Cowell's, though Giovanni's chest could not have been more different. Due ninfe, he smiled, with that sly, sexy smile that seemed so characteristically Italian. 2 nymphs. 1 nymph and a crone might have been more appropriate, thought Claire. Casually, Claire slipped an arm over her breasts, conscious that if she let go of the ledge to protect her modesty, she would disappear under the water. She must carry this off with a confidence, as if English ladies took naked dips every morning. The terrible thought struck her that Giovanni was looking straight at her body through the crystal-clear water. Febbre de primavera, the fever of the spring, he stated, as if this was a perfectly acceptable explanation for finding a nude woman in a fountain. Nobody can resist. And then he walked onwards, whistling. I do try to make it funny. It's supposed to be funny as well. Not too serious.
It is. And I love the extrovert artist who lives next door, who turns up in a... Does he take a Russian fur hat in the heat and befriends the... I mean, it is a very disparate group of women, and you think, oh, this is going to be like hell on earth. And one will sort of blend with another, and it all comes together, the dynamics, and they form a real bond, don't they?
They do. Well, funnily enough, that character, who's the sort of famous artist who lives next door to them, I saw that man. I was in Soho, and I saw this man walking towards me, and he was wearing a trench coat, a long trench coat, a fur hat, and he had a dog in his pocket. And I thought, that's my character, that is him. Yeah. And I had no idea who this guy was, but I mean, he became the artist.
So are there friends of Maeve Herron's who are going, that's me?
This is the terrible thing, isn't it, about being a writer?
Have you?
Everyone's scared they're going to end up in your novel, and more scared they won't.
But are there people who will recognise themselves in...
I don't think you ever use a whole person, usually. No. You use a bit of a person, but you don't use a whole person. So people aren't going to be able to say, hey, that was me.
Yeah. Well, people never recognise themselves anyway, I don't think.
Well, I think one of the funniest things is because my books are all set where I live, in Cornwall. And when the first book, The Cornish House, came out, I walked into the pub and everybody looked at me. They'd clearly all read the book, and they all thought they were in it. And one gentleman in particular who is great, but he's always wearing short shorts, even in the middle of winter, and he's older than I am, and boots. And he decided that the hero of the book was based on him.
Oh, did he? How wonderful.
How do you break it to him that definitely this was not the case? I just said, no, there's nobody local in my book.
Yeah, I mean, you're both character-driven. I think a lot of men's books are, plot-driven, but you're both character-driven because you do get to really like your characters. And I think the other dynamic I quite liked reading about in your book was the grandfather and granddaughter and grandson. There was Jack and his grandmother. And I think so much nowadays it's a relationship that has disappeared with an elderly grandmother. Your grandmother now looks like we do. Whereas mine was a large lady with a grey bun and an apron on in the corner. And they've got elderly, grandfathers. but there is this wonderful, wonderful bond between them, which comes across very, very strongly.
It was an important relationship in my life, so of course it comes out on the page.
Yeah, yeah. And the girls, of course, are twins, aren't
Yes.
they? Yeah. And that's very important in this book. Did you do a lot of what sort of research? Because research is so much easier nowadays because we've got the internet. But I'm guessing you both get off your backsides and get out there. It's important to feel. You obviously went to the Lemon Groves.
I obviously went to the Lemon Groves. It was fascinating. I was in Ravello researching the Lemon Groves, and they were filming Wonder Woman, the movie, once it's just come out. And this extraordinary fog, which I'd borrowed and put in the book, I have to say, don't waste anything as a writer, this extraordinary fog descended on Ravello, which is a very warm, hot place. For a day, it was like a London pea super. You just literally could not put your hand in front of your face. And we were told all these stories how Wonder Woman, the movie, had to stop, but it's 400 people were filming this movie, had to stop for 2 days because of this fog. But I was able to use the fog.
Yeah.
Which if you read the book, you'll find the fog.
And you can't find that out on the internet. And likewise, you need the smells and the sounds and the, don't you?
Absolutely. I've been lucky because I know the area so well, but for me, this was my first venture into historical fiction.
Right.
And I was panicked, having grown up in the States, having a different education on World War II. I thought, I can't do this. And my editor kept saying, yes, you can, yes, you can. And I'd fallen in the trap before of doing a lot of research beforehand and then go to write the book and find out, actually, that's not what I need.
Mm-hmm.
So I've now learnt to just do enough research to write the first draft and then go and do the serious research, because I interviewed 3 Wrens in the end, a GI who'd been in a cold, wet field in the UK before D-Day, and so forth, as well as tapping into other resources.
It's a funny thing, research, isn't it? I think we've all read books where authors suddenly think, yeah, all right, you did your research, and it's too obvious. They're almost showing off with what they know, and you think you should have left that in the first draft and taken me somewhere else. It's just too obvious, isn't it?
Hits you over the head sometimes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
More research than actual use of research.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, we can. You're American, we can tell, as they said in Basil Fawlty. How did you discover the beauty of Cornwall then?
It's all to do with my husband.
Good man.
When I first met him, about a month after we met, he took me to Cornwall. I thought to meet his parents, but it was to pass the Cornwall test. And if I hadn't fallen in love with Cornwall, we wouldn't be coming up our 26th wedding anniversary.
So you're no longer, as they always say, excuse the language, but in Cornwall, you can be there for 30 years and you're still a bloody foreigner. But are you still a foreigner?
I am, but I'm their foreigner.
You're their foreigner. And what was it? Because America's a great country, and you've got the mountains, you've got the beaches, you've got everything. What was it about Cornwall?
There's something, particularly around the Helford area, that is very similar to where I grew up on Cape Cod.
Oh.
In fact, Chris noticed it when we were trying to find the location for our wedding reception, and he looked across one view from a small island in a bay area to Katuit, and he said, that looks just like the Helford, and it did. So I suppose it spoke to me on that thing, but there's just something about the landscape. I would describe it as my first trip to Ireland when I was 13. I felt my roots go down because all 4 grandparents came from Ireland, and I was home in a way I'd never been home before. I arrived in Cornwall and I felt something, but my roots couldn't go down, and the only way that I can hold on to Cornwall is to write about it.
Yeah, it's very elemental. It's fairies and piskies and all that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, I had a very romantic introduction to Ravello, which is really Lanzarella in the book, when for my 40th birthday, my husband did this wonderful thing of doing a surprise weekend in Ravello. I really didn't know I was going there. And he got my best friend to pack my suitcase, and she packed everything I possessed, both summer and winter, apart from my sunglasses, which would have been really useful. And I really didn't know I was going. And we got to a hotel near Gatwick, and I realised, we're going to stay in a hotel. And I said in my lovely romantic way to him, I must renew the car insurance tomorrow. And that was too much for him. He suddenly said, well, you can't, because we're going to Ravello. And we arrived in Ravello, flew to Naples, went to Ravello, and we walked into this lovely hotel, which is the hotel that I've turned into another hotel in the book. And the manager walked up and said, welcome to your 40s, Signora. And I, that's very wonderful.
What a
It
wonderful
really was.
romantic.
It was very romantic.
How do you describe the books that you both write? What is there a genre? What can, because for years when people talked about books for women, and I think these are mostly women's books, there was quite a disparaging term of chick lit.
I know. And now it's grip lit, isn't it? That's the new one, the scary thrillers. And that's
psychological thrillers.
Psychological thrillers. I like contemporary women's fiction because I like the women. I'm very proud to write for women. I do mainly write for women, but I don't like the chick lit. I mean, chick lit's now it's still going, but it's slightly dead now, isn't it?
How you coined the phrase? You call them beach reads.
Beach reads.
Cornish beach reads.
Cornish beach reads. But I was trying to describe it to somebody yesterday. Somebody had asked me that question, and I'm like, it's not the book that's going to challenge you. It's hopefully the book that's going to keep you engaged the whole way through, and you won't notice you're lying on the beach, and you'll probably walk off being burnt.
And I'd like to add the word intelligent.
Yeah.
Actually, on the whole, I think they are intelligent.
Yeah.
And so there's not a book that you're just going to. They're going to be a book that you'll enjoy on a certain level.
Yeah, there's some sort of guilty pleasure we're meant to have. We're meant to be ashamed in the same way as I don't know whether it's still right, but up until a few years ago, there wasn't a comedy that had won an Oscar. Because, oh no, that's far too trivial. It has to be very worthy and dull to win an Oscar. And I think it's the same with these sort of books, these beach reads, these intelligent, just because I feel lovely at the end of it, just because it gives me a warm glow,
but it has to be less because of that.
Yeah.
Well, I'm very much an endings writer. I cannot bear books where I really don't know what's happened at the end. I mean, I remember you invest a long time of your life in a book, and then at the end you think, huh?
Yeah.
I do like an end. I mean, not a totally obvious end, but an end. And I used to start my books at the end. I've stopped doing that now. But
my mother-in-law did that.
Yeah.
Used to read. Well, you mean? Oh no, my mother-in-law used to read from the end.
No,
lest she got a surprise.
No. I've heard of people doing that. I think it's absolutely corrupt. They ought to be arrested.
Absolutely.
Going to bookshops and reading the end.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So when you. How did you first get published? I mean, you come from... Let's talk about your backgrounds a bit, because you were in television.
I was in television, and I had my second child, and I had a big job in television.
What were you doing?
I was the editor of a programme called The 6 O'Clock Show, which is a big programme with Michael Aspel and Danny Baker.
Oh, gosh,
people like Janet Street Porter. And the sad ex-Paula Yates was our presenter as well. And I had my second child, and my husband was doing a very similar job, so we were never home, neither of us were ever home. And I just thought I wanted to change my life. I was always given this horrible label, the woman who gave up her career to be with her children, which was actually not true, because actually I gave up my career to have a better life. Right. And it was very nice. I was able to see more of my children as well.
Yeah, they were a big part of it.
But anyway, so I started writing a book called Rich, about the richest girl in the world, which I sort of based on the Onassis heiress. And then I got an agent. I was very lucky, and they liked my writing. But she said every time I rewrote it, it got worse.
Oh.
So there came a moment where I was sort of demoted and given to the second division person, who said to me, well, "Why don't you write about something you really care about?" And I went, I don't know, what do I care about, And then I suddenly thought, well, this is what I know the most of, is about having the dilemma of children and work and children and how you balance it all. So I wrote a novel about that, and
it all.
And it was a zeitgeist moment where it was very much sort of something everyone was feeling, and it just suddenly took off all around the world. And I went all around the world being asked, "So what's the answer for women?" And I thought, God, what is the answer for women? Somebody tell me.
According to we were discussing this yesterday with two other female authors, and they both said, "No, you can't have it all. No, you just can't. Something's got to give somewhere." You describe yourself, Liz, as expat, expert, wife, mother of three, and dreamer turned doer. Dreamer turned doer. So, and you came to writing a little later?
Well, I always wanted to be a writer. I did my degree in literature. I did my senior thesis, 3/4 of a novel. My professor gave me her agent's name, and I never sent it off. And I did then write a history of a small island off of Massachusetts, which I think put me off writing for a long time because I was writing for a committee, which I will never do again. And then I went on to live life. And my husband was in the oil and gas business, so we did 9 international moves in almost as many years, probably 13 years. We did 9 international moves, and I had children and juggled the whole lot. And I did become an expert at living around the world, how to travel with children, how to integrate them into communities, and so forth. And I then ran a volunteer organization that was global in something like 600 locations and so forth. And I suddenly sat down one New Year's Eve and thought, I really want to write fiction again. And that year I put pen to paper and I wrote A Mills and Boon, because I thought it's manageable. It's 50,000 words, and my youngest had just gone into nursery, and I had 2 hours a day. And so I did, and that was duly rejected. It was absolutely awful. And I found the Romantic Novelists Association because of that, and I am eternally grateful to them because they have the new writers scheme, and you have to submit a book every year and a published author reads it. And I don't know to this day who that first reader was, but I love her because she said, you can write, you can tell a story. I can tell you've been writing non-fiction because of the style, because I'd done lots of corporate articles. You're a storyteller, but your voice, it's not suited to this at all. You need to find where you need to go. And then I just wrote book after book. Each year I wrote a new book and I rewrote the last one. And eventually found where I needed to be.
It's interesting to hear that, because I think a lot of people think that writers are, well, the muse descends upon me. But it's like anything. It's like learning to play the violin, or that you have to practice, you have to keep going until you hit the gold nugget comes up. And there are plenty of authors who've got a rubbish book in the background that's locked away somewhere.
Oh, yes.
I've got more confident over I've written about 16, I think, now. And I've got more, when I first started, like with having it all, I'd written a 45-page synopsis, which is incredibly long. I mean, you know,
it's not quite a synopsis.
It's not really. So I just had to expand it. Obviously, most synopses are probably about 4 or 5 pages. So, and now I've got to the point where I've got the confidence to kind of know, let myself not do that,
right.
and to have an instinct more where you feel the drama, you need more drama, or you need a different kind of drama, or you can trust yourself more. But that takes a while, I think, to get to that point where you do trust yourself.
Liz, you have, I can't remember the phrase you used, but like a writing buddy who looks at your work.
A critique partner.
A critique partner.
Yes.
Okay, and this is
Not your
obviously...
agent.
No, it's
someone she loves.
Oh, someone she loves. I never show mine to my husband at all.
No. My husband doesn't read it until a certain page. No, this is another writer, and she helps with the brainstorming. She reads early drafts. You know, you get stuck on a scene. Does this work? Am I imagining it? What am I missing here? And we share work, and we're both very different writers, so it works quite well.
Yeah, but by love, I mean, it has to be somebody you trust.
Oh, completely, yes.
Yeah. To give you the right feedback. Otherwise it's just, well, no, I don't think so. And somebody who knows you and knows where you're coming from with it. I've got to ask you about this. Was it Having It All that was made into the Korean?
Yes, it was made. That was the one that was made
Korean
into Korean.
series.
And I've had 7 TV movies in Germany. Let's forget those.
Why say?
My second book did amazingly in Germany, and I think it was because of the title. In English, it had the worst title. It was called Scenes from the Sex War, and it nearly did for my career, really seriously.
Scenes
from the Sex War. And it was a very very funny book, sweet book, but the title was, it kept on being put in the women's section. Nothing wrong with that, but, you know, the women's rights section.
Right.
Anyway, but in German it was called Darling, You've Forgotten to Pick Up Your Socks. And German men obviously do not pick up their socks, because this was a huge bestseller in Germany.
How extraordinary. It just goes to show, again, that what is important with a book. And yesterday the 2 authors I was talking to were saying how important the sleeves are of the book. And one of the authors, Lee, who writes very, very violent books based on her own experiences, she said they kept giving me these twee covers with a young girl. It was totally wrong. And you would think that the writer calls the shots. Not at all. Not at all. Are you happy with it? Do you have much say, or have you just been lucky?
I've had some input. My first cover, they came out and it was all pink and the colour of the house was wrong. And I said, that's a house in the Cotswolds, that's not a Cornish house, and that's the title of the book. And everything in the garden was wrong. And I went out into my own garden, because the book starts in August, and I took photographs and I sent it to my editor, and she changed it and got the stone changed on the house. So I did have input in that, but very little elsewise. But I've been proved wrong as well. The Cornish Stranger, which is probably my favourite of my books, I loved the trade paperback of it because it actually had Frenchman's Creek on it. Although it had the Helford boathouse, but I tried to get rid of that, but they wouldn't. They left it there. So that was fine. But when they came out with the mass market of it, it has a woman in a sundress standing in what looks like Dubai sand, looking out on a Cornish scene. And it's a very dark book in many ways. And I'm thinking, but it sold really well. So, you know, I was wrong. My instinct was wrong on that, and they were right. That cover sold the book.
Yeah, how about you then, Maeve?
Even though I've worked in television, I'm a bit chary about putting too much of my own ideas into covers, because you can get it wrong, I think. And, you know, I do try and trust the publishers, unless I really disagree. And I have quite liked most of them. And then there's a big argument: should it be letters or should it be like this is now illustrated. This is the fashion now. You'll notice.
Yeah.
But the last three have all been just letters. You know, the time of their lives. You know. But now and it is fashion, I think, really.
I have classic women walking away.
Women walking away.
And that is really, that doesn't give you the wrong feel of your book at all. Well, not that yours does, but I mean, going with the classic sort of doesn't give you the wrong feel at all, but some of them can be. So what about, what was this series like, this Korean miniseries?
Well, I didn't really see it, you see. I saw some of the German ones, which were quite good, but the miniseries in Korea was really, it was very, I mean, I looked at it slightly, but I mean, I didn't watch much of it because it was completely incomprehensible.
How do you feel? I mean, obviously it'd be lovely to have any of your books televised, and I have to say this book in particular I think would make a wonderful series, and it is the sort of thing that we'd love to watch on I'm not going to say it's feel good, but it's emotive, and it is a shell seeker type of book. And is that something you would be happy to hand over? Because some authors, you get somebody like Lynda La Plante who so hated what they wanted to do with her stuff that she formed her own production company in order to produce it. But there are some, like Anne Cleeves, who handed over Shetland and said, no, it's totally different than my book, you know, or it isn't, or it's nothing to do with me. How would you feel handing over your babies?
I think as long as they didn't change the themes, which is the tricky bit, I'd probably be completely fine about it. I think on that, I remember Jojo Moyes talking about Me Before You, and she ended up writing the script because she didn't want a Hollywood ending.
Yeah.
You know, she wanted to keep it true. And this book, I had written a different ending for this book.
Oh, had you?
And my editor said, no, it was the wrong one. It's a twist too far. And it was interesting, and she was right. She was absolutely right on that. But I think if you made it the Hollywood ending, you'd ruin the book.
Yeah. Yeah, but
that would bother me.
Yeah.
I had a similar conversation. The editor in Germany, I've done very well in Germany, and the German editor who I'd never met, Sylvia, suddenly rang up with one of my books and said, "You cannot kill my lovely Lavinia." And I was going, "Oh God, okay." Yeah. and I thought, well, she cares that much. So this character Lavinia, who is a grandmother, I sort of got to have very ill in hospital and let her recover, which wasn't so much a Hollywood ending. I think it was probably wrong, my bit. I think for a while I thought I was a different kind of writer and I was going to have some serious heavy bits, but actually from what people read my books for, it isn't that. And I think, you know, there's emotion, but that was probably a step too far, so I did change what Sylvia asked for.
I think one of the things that authors usually say, and I as somebody who has never written a book and could sit looking at a piece of blank paper for 6 weeks and not write anything, I don't understand when you start writing a book, and they always say it, and do you know, I didn't know that was going to happen. And I think, what do you mean? You created this flipping character. How did you not know? But somehow they take on a life, I assume.
I think really that when you create characters, there comes a point where they're like people, really. So their lives
they are people.
So their lives are going to take you by surprise a bit sometimes. Unless you've planned it, they might do something that's, I mean, it's an odd process because you are thinking it up, and yet you can say, oh, well, they wouldn't do that, or they would do that. And so it is a kind of funny process where it sort of takes over a bit without being too pretentious.
Have any of your characters totally surprised you, and you've changed? Well, you had to change the ending because...
yes, because my editor said it was a twist too far. Yeah, I've been surprised many times because I'm not naturally a planner. I will know roughly. I normally know my title. I normally know my location, and I know my main characters, and I have a rough idea of where the book will end, and I enjoy writing that way. But because I'm now doing a book a year, there's less opportunity. I have to do some planning because I don't have the opportunity to write myself into a plot hole. But that does mean there's less surprise, but it still happens. In the Cornish House, the favourite character of most people is Old Tom, and he was not planned at all. But I realised as I was writing that there's this stroppy teenager, Hannah, and she needed a mentor, and he walked in on the page unplanned and perfect.
What about reading other authors? Do you read to see what's out there to gauge?
I'm kind of the opposite, actually. I kind of like, at the moment, I'm reading all the Cazalet Chronicles because they're so different to anything I would write. And I kind of go the other way, although I've already read them once already. I mean, I like sort of something comforting when I'm writing, but not something like what I...
Oh, you can read while you're writing, can you?
Oh, yes, but I don't want to read something like
but I
what
don't
I'm
read
writing.
Women's fiction when I'm writing. Right now I'm reading John le Carré. So something completely different.
Lives
you
down
have
in
to
Cornwall.
read all the time.
I do always read my favourite Georgette Hares before I start writing. I read The Grand Sophie before I write any book because I so love it, and I so love the plot, and I think it's the cleverest of... I was terrified to learn that an old woman who's at school with me has written the screenplay for it. It's being turned into either a TV or a film, and I'm going... No, not The Grand Sophie.
Because you've been writing historical books as well.
I've written a couple of historical books. I wrote one about John Donne, the metaphysical poet, because I fell in love with him when I was 18, and it was a long-lasting love affair. And it was a good book, that too. And then the second one I wrote, I felt wasn't really... It wasn't quite the same passion in it, and passion you have to have. And I missed the one-liner. I like the funny one-liner, and it's hard to do it in Tudor.
What about you, Liz? I mean, we talked about the great love of Cornwall, and everything seems to be centred around Cornwall. But you mentioned Dubai, and you've had a life there as well. Is there anything that gets you going about Dubai?
The desert, the real desert. When you get... I always get confused in Dubai. When you get south of Abu Dhabi and you're in the Liwa, it's where a lot of the Star Wars, recent Star Wars films was, and the desert there is so vast and so empty that it fills you. But I don't have a story to tell about that. But it is inspiring. But I couldn't write about it.
That's extraordinary.
I mean, there are certain places I go to and I know I could create a story. Like Edinburgh is a city that I can kind of feel it bubbling in the ground, which makes me seem really weird. Places in the coast of Maine, Cape Cod, I dearly love. Cornwall. I don't know if I could write about Ireland now, which is what I wrote about when I did the novel at university. But
And I meant to ask you that when you are reading other people's books, is it a danger that you love a book and something seeps in? Musicians, we've had lots of musicians who've been sort of held up for taking a little snatch of a song, and they thought that it was theirs, but they'd heard it somewhere else. Is there a worry that you can be influenced by other books?
I think you can be influenced, but I tend to think it's positive. If you're so impressed by a book that you pick up something from it. But I think with writers there is a translation process that comes in, and your own voice comes out in books, without a doubt. When I was a new writer, I was very wary particularly while I was reading a book in my own genre, because I was like, my children were as expat kids. They had rabbit ears. Whatever colloquial accent was around, they picked it up.
Yeah.
But now I'm confident in my own writer's voice, and yes, of course, I read books and think, oh my God, why didn't I write that?
Yeah.
You know, and that's such a treat when it happens.
Yeah.
When, you know, as a writer, it's very difficult. Becoming a writer makes being a reader harder, because you know so much more, and it takes some of the pleasure away. So when you pick up a book that you forget that, you know, you forget the technique, you forget everything, and you're absorbed in the story, it's just bliss.
Yeah.
I think absolutely what you're saying. I think your voice is almost the most important thing, finding your voice, and your voice that makes you completely unique. And you know, actually, it sounds ridiculous, this, but I was reading this on the train coming here, and I was thinking to myself, actually, this is quite funny and clever. And I'm thinking, is my new one going to be as funny? And you never kind of get the confidence to think, you know, yes, this is me, this is my voice, I write like that. And yet, writers, when they get together, they always, if they tell each other what they're writing at the moment, they get very nervous. Oh, God, that's rather like mine.
Yeah.
But actually, it isn't in the end, because it's your voice that transforms it.
Is it when you've had a huge success, do you ever feel like the curse of the Oscars, that the next one isn't going to be as good? And because everybody's got social media now, you suddenly read, oh, I've read Liz's latest, not as good as the last one. Is that constantly in you?
There is pressure. There is no question about it. And yes, those ones are always the hardest to take. You know, they've obviously loved everything else, but somebody didn't like this one because there wasn't enough Cornwall in it.
Oh.
Because I had Weymouth. I had the nerve to have Weymouth and London and Cape Cod in it. I'm thinking, okay.
But not everybody lives in Cornwall, so you have readers who don't live in Cornwall, so that would be okay.
Absolutely. How important, talking about your readers, I mean, these events that are springing up all over the place, and thank goodness they are. I should think they are wonderful for you to come to actually,
fantastic.
It's like an actor on a stage getting tremendous feedback right away rather than being on telly.
To remember how much pleasure reading gives everybody. I mean, I think it is still my number one pleasure. I mean, I love telly, I love films, but reading, something so personal. You can take a book to bed with you, can't you? It's something that is so wonderful
but
about
to come
that.
and meet people who've actually read your books and told you the effect that it has on them.
Absolutely.
I also love the fact that once it leaves me and it goes into a reader's hand, it becomes their book. Because they bring their own experience and everything else to it. And when you come to an event like this and you talk to somebody who's read a book and they have had some experience in it, and they pick up on something that might have not been major in my mind while writing it, but it really moved them, that's incredibly emotive for me.
If one's ever in danger of feeling vain or anything like this, I thought I'd bring this along. This is very funny, I think. This is an email I got only last week from Amazon, and it says, hello, Ms. Maeve Harron. Are you looking for something in fiction? If so, you might be interested in this item. An Italian Holiday by Maeve Harron.
Perfect.
You've been checking your Amazon stats too much.
No, well, then it gives all my other books as well. I know, to be recognised by their algorithm.
Absolutely.
I never check my Amazon stats. Never, ever. I'm hopeless
But do you go into the bookshop and suddenly move
I've done that. I've done that. You must have catch people in the act. I know. I was always... Exactly.
You're obviously having to do a book a year. There's not having to, but you do. You're obviously a very disciplined writer that gets up in the morning and writes. No,
I'm not. I don't have a schedule as such.
No.
And we've had a transitional year, so I'm now trying to find some sort of routine. I can be very disciplined, but I'm not always.
Yeah. What about you, May?
I try to be disciplined, and I try to think, you know, I'm an early riser, and I always think, well, you know, okay, you wake up at 6 o'clock, why don't you go and start working? And I very rarely do. I take a cup of tea back to bed and read somebody else's book, and then try. But I do try and, you know, write as a job. You know, you have to treat writing as a job. You know, do it.
You do.
I'm not part of the laptop generation, though. Sadly, I have to write with a PC.
Oh dear.
I've got a laptop, but when I see all these people in cafes, writing their novels,
Yeah.
and I have to sit in front of a brick wall to write it. And when I had a beautiful new study made recently, they said, "Don't you want your desk by the window?" And I said, "No, brick wall. That's what I want."
Yeah.
And that's what I write.
Is it still a great thrill? I've often heard authors talk about that time their first book is put in their hand.
Oh,
and
God,
they
yes.
get-
Any
Is
book,
it,
actually.
Is it still a thrill?
Oh, still
yeah.
a thrill.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
I stroke them
Oh.
and I sniff them. and
Sniff them.
Yep. Well,
Can't-
there's a book smell.
Can't do that with a Kindle, can you?
No, you
Stroke
certainly
and
can't
sniff
sniff
your
your
Kindle.
Kindle.
So,
No, absolutely.
okay, I've got probably an impossible thing for you. You get to the pearly gates, and you're asked, "So, what do you do?" "I'm an author." "Okay, tell me your best. Give us your best shot. What's the best book you've written, and I'll tell you whether you can come in or not." Which is the one?
God,
Which is the
terribly
one?
difficult,
Well, it's
isn't
like
it?
a desert island disc, this, but
Yeah.
it's just the one book
Yeah.
you're getting in with.
Yeah.
St. Peter will let you in if he likes it.
Well,
yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Always your last, I think a pop star would say.
Yeah, that's what actors say about films.
Yes, I've been to see Bob Dylan in concert where he won't play any of his old favourites, and you get so angry with
Yeah,
him,
yeah. What about you?
Up until the release of this, I would have said A Cornish Stranger. That was absolutely my
Yeah.
favourite. But this has topped it. The Returning Tide.
Right. Well, they've given me much pleasure. There are a sea of books out there of gone girls and missing and terrible psychological dramas. And if you look at the bestseller list, I mean, it's terrifying. So to find a couple of books that I read on the beach, I read in bed, I miss your books. I finished your books and I miss them, and I've got to find another one. And
I'm sure we
I
can
don't,
help out.
I don't think you can say fairer than that.
No,
but,
you can't.
But
That's
thank
wonderful.
you so much, Liz Fenwick
Thank you.
and Maeve Harron. Thank you.
Pleasure.